Welcome back. All right, so starting things off today with a topic that I discussed in last night's power rankings, which of course posted this morning. And so we'll go through and we'll discuss this because the JT Miller Pettersson situation, it feels like, has become untenable. And the weird thing is, the team has already talked about it. The team's clearly aggravated about talking about it, and they don't want to talk about it anymore. But when the team doesn't want to talk about it anymore, the way it's reported is the team is exasperated. Yes, with all the reporting on it. And so everybody knows that these guys don't like each other and I I mean, winning can fix that, but at this point we already know that relationship's broken, so the team's going to have to figure something out here. Elliot Friedman reporting last night on Hockey Night in Canada that the team is testing the market for both players. So you put Pettersson's name out there, Miller's name out there, just to see what kind of interest you're going to get. Now, prior to Friedman's reporting last night, what I had heard yesterday as well from Nick Kyprios was that JT Miller, and I mean that I heard the same way everybody else did, not that I have a back channel with Nick Kyprios, but that Kyprios has reported that JT Miller will only waive to go to the New York Rangers. And if you're a Rangers fan, I think you'd find that encouraging because with the way that things are going for the New York Rangers, the idea that a player's still saying, look, if I'm going to go anywhere, I'd like to go to the Rangers, and he's a good player, he can still be very productive, and he might be exactly what the Rangers need. I understand why people have jumped on this idea very, very quickly and why some Ranger fans might be excited at this idea. And I've also seen the, Canucks are going to regret if they trade him because if they get in the playoffs and they don't have Miller, right now I'll just take playoffs. And they're not going to make the playoffs with Miller with the way they've been playing lately. So something's got to change. This is a team that needs some kind of a shakeup. And I'm not saying that Miller and Patterson would be my picks if I was going to shake things up, but this is definitely what's out there. And like I said, this is where they're testing the market right now. Brian Burke had an interesting take on this. Burke's never been a big fan of the media in certain Canadian markets. We know that when he left Toronto, he was very clear on him no longer having to deal with Canadian markets. I get the feeling that in Vancouver, he didn't have the same experience, but it wasn't that far off. And Burke saying that the issue of two guys not liking each other and having some sort of squabble with one another and personality conflicts has happened on every team he's ever run. So, of course it has. I've talked about that on this channel before. I do not believe that there's a team in the National Hockey League right now where everybody gets along with everybody else. But you're able to put that aside and go out there and play and do your best for the team. And I think that's the key thing is that Miller and Patterson have been able to work through this in years past and it didn't become public. And so what Burke's saying is what's throwing him off is just how public this is. He's not a big fan of how public this is. This should have stayed in the locker room or at least behind closed doors. And I agree with him. I agree with him. I don't think that as fans, it's necessarily our business which players don't like each other. And I am sure that every team in the league, you have similar situations. There may very well be players who don't get along with each other that, with how much reporting there is on this, might be concerned that, hey, I don't really get along with this teammate. I hope that doesn't become public, that kind of thing. Right. So, the personality conflicts are there. Brad Richardson, who played for the Canucks, he was interviewed this week too. I didn't put him on the board, but he said that at one point he did tell Miller tone it down a little bit on the criticism of Pettersson, just that he felt like Miller was too hard on Pettersson because they're two different personalities and they don't play the same and they don't react to situations the same way. And so that really lends itself to this idea that Miller isn't necessarily happy with the way that Patterson reacts to situations or how vocal he's not in comparison. I've also seen this idea that Miller's jealous of the amount of money Pettersson gets. Miller's not that kind of guy. If Miller just wanted to cash in and wanted to get his maximum value, he wouldn't have signed the contract extension with the Canucks. He would have gone to market. So I really don't think that Miller is the type to look at somebody else on his team and say, hey, he's making more money than I am, I'm going to pout. I don't think that's a thing. Now, according to Friedman, there's three options. These seem pretty self-explanatory. Either neither one gets dealt. I'd prefer to see that, to be honest. And I know how boring that sounds to people, but I'd prefer to see these guys sit down and talk it out. and just agree to disagree on things, that's fine, but figure out some kind of way. There is a way around this. There is definitely conflict resolution you can do with these two that should make things a bit better. Now, it's possible that we're so many years into this that it's reached a breaking point, which means that one may get dealt or both of them get dealt. Now, both of them getting dealt to me is just that's the nuclear option. To me, that's if the Canucks decide, if Alvin decides, you know what, I'm done. I've got to show this locker room that, things are going to change and that, we're in charge and move both. But I don't think that works. This is a team that I think still has a pretty darn good core, and moving both, you're basically kind of blowing it up. No matter what you get in return, you have no idea what that's going to do to the team, what that's going to do to chemistry, and whether the players you're acquiring are going to produce as well as you think they might, and what that might do to just locker room environments. So Pettersson and Miller, I want to compare the two in terms of contracts. It's quite different. Pettersson's 26 and Miller's 31. That's one thing to keep in mind here. Pettersson still could have 10 years left in his career. Could have more than 10 years. He could play into his late 30s. Miller is 31 now, so you're probably going to get a few more years of good production from him. But when a player gets into their early 30s, normally you do see a bit of a drop-off in production. And that might cause teams who could have been interested in Miller a couple of years ago to maybe not be as interested now. Now, Pettersson's cap hit of $11.6 million is high. It is. And it's until 2032. So that contract's got a lot of years left on it. But he doesn't have a no-movement clause that I can tell right now. Puckpedia shows a no-movement clause for next season, not for this season. Pettersson becomes the easier to trade for that reason because Miller has the no-movement clause. Now, 34 games played by Pettersson, 10 goals, 18 assists, 38 points for Pettersson. Miller, on the other hand, 31 years of age. He has an $8 million cap hit until 2030. Again, the no movement clause, and in 28 games, 6 goals, 19 assists for 25 points. Miller probably should have more goals, but one thing with Miller is he's had 2 very, very good productive seasons as a Vancouver Canuck. I think point per game is probably where he should be and what the expectation should be. So Miller's older. The contract, there's the chance that both of these contracts could age poorly. Absolute, sure, yep. I know there's people who are going to say, well, Pettersson's is already aging poorly. Fine, that's all right. For the purpose of this video, fine, that's great. But I personally, if I was the GM, I'd be probably more willing to move Miller than Pettersson. Though, not knowing the environment in the locker room, I might want to talk to the other players first. And just have that discussion. Because we have talked about a rift in the Vancouver Canucks locker room. It has to go back to 2019. It has to go back that far. Because I know I reported on issues that might be going on in that locker room before the pause in March of 2020. I know I did. So for the Vancouver Canucks, if this is something that's been going on that long, they definitely need to just snuff that out and make sure that going forward, you're going to have guys who don't like each other, but make sure it's not a rift that could lead to a split in the locker room if that's there. So I think it's more complicated than just, well, let's just go ahead and make a trade. I know that we have generations that have grown up playing video games where you just trade players and you get whatever you want back and yay, everybody's happy. It doesn't really work that way in real life. So they have to be very, very careful, and I think they know that. Now, Friedman's reporting too, he says that the Canucks are looking for a center back in a trade, which makes sense because both Miller and Pettersson can play center. And I would think they'd also be looking for help on the blue line. Without Hughes and without Hronek, go look at their defense and the depth chart on the blue line. It's there's a lot of guys that are trying their best, but they do not have a number 1 or a number 2 defenseman right now. They have a bunch of number 3s. Okay, they have a couple of number 3s and 4s, and then they have some 5s and 6s there too, and they're doing their best right now. I think that's part of the reason why the Canucks have had a hard time closing out games recently, and I think it's added to struggles where they're already struggling before Hughes goes down with injury. Now, their pending UFA list I thought was worth putting on the board because you're trying to talk Besser into sticking around, correct? So whatever happens here, you have to ask yourself, so what works better for Brock Besser? And if, let's just say Besser's on Team Miller, let's just put it that way. Maybe Besser goes if Miller goes, that kind of thing. Like, I have no idea. Maybe. Suter, Lankinen are also pending UFAs. I think the sooner the Canucks sit down with Lankinen and work on maybe some kind of extension, I think that would make sense. And I'm thinking 2 years, cap hit of about $1.5 million, that kind of thing. Because Lankinen's been fantastic and all of that fun stuff. One thing that I've seen too, and I've seen people arguing back and forth about playoffs, and I don't think people are arguing from a place of being honest about this. People who say Pettersson's bad in the playoffs, and then there's people trying to argue that Miller's bad in the playoffs because of his career stats in the playoffs, which is a little disingenuous. He has had more ice time and more of a chance to succeed in Vancouver than he ever had in Tampa or the Rangers. He was on deeper teams then. And Tampa Bay, he definitely was not going to be a top guy, so they trade him to Vancouver. In Vancouver in 2020, 17 games played in those playoffs, 6 goals, 12 assists, 18 points. Pettersson in those same playoffs, 17 games, 7 goals, 11 assists, 18 points. So that worked pretty well. Now, this year's playoffs, well, 2024's playoffs, 13 games played by Miller, 3 goals, 9 assists, 12 points. Pettersson, 13 games, 1 goal, 5 assists, 6 points. I will say again, I don't think Pettersson was 100% in those playoffs. And I think the overall track record of these two is sadly too short because the Canucks miss the playoffs too often. So when I see people talking about Miller's career stats in the playoffs, he's only got X amount of goals and I think it's 91 playoff games. True, but he's been more productive for the Canucks in the playoffs than he was prior to that. And for Pettersson, I think Pettersson can be a point per game player come playoff time. They're different types of players. And the thing is, you need those gritty, mouthy kind of guys in your lineup, but you also need the finesse guys who can make the really pretty plays, like Pettersson can when he's really going. You need both. So the idea that playoff teams are made up of JT Millers, yes, but they're also made up of guys who play like Pettersson. So I think for the Canucks, they kind of need players of both varieties. Now, I don't know which player's going to go. If I had to, wager, I would say it's probably going to be Miller of the two. I think Miller's probably the easier one to trade, but that contract is not going to be all that easy to trade. That goes till 2030. So the Canucks may end up taking a bad contract back in a trade. The name that immediately came to mind for me was Zibanejad. Zibanejad is a productive forward who's not being very productive this year for the Rangers. He's got a contract that's not fantastic, but he's a forward. He can drive the play. And I think a change of scenery could really help Meek out. And so that could kind of work. Now, I don't think that would be 1-for-1, but it's a start. One other name I saw was like Keandre Miller. And when I saw that, this might be the first time this has ever happened where somebody proposed a trade and I went, you know what? That works. That actually kind of works. The idea of, if it was Zibanejad and Keandre Miller, because Keandre Miller's a young defenseman. He's the kind of defenseman the Canucks could take and maybe, things improve for him. It has not been a great run for him with the Rangers this year. And so, yeah, I guess we'll just see what happens there. The team does not have a lot of cap space. That is one thing that the Canucks are dealing with. The Rangers do have cap space. And so they're not going to be trading with the Canucks from a position of weakness. If anything, the Rangers might be able to get a little bit more out of this deal because they do have cap space and the Canucks really don't, comparatively speaking. The Canucks also have to keep in mind that with Demko and the fact that he does seem to have these lingering injuries, you might want to look at getting another goaltender. And I know that's not going to come from the Rangers because right now Shesterkin's on IR. So I think the Canucks have some moves to make. And I know just last week, there was one of the Canucks losses where I mumbled at the TV, Alvin needs to make a move. Something needs to change. And they need to add a little more depth on that blue line. And they definitely need to make a move that's going to maybe make things a little more harmonious. Maybe that's part of what it is. Maybe all of this has become a distraction on the ice as well. But let me know your thoughts in the comments section below as always. Who would you trade and what would you trade them for? And yeah, the Rangers seem like a natural partner for trading players. Maybe the Sabres. Maybe the Sabres would be a good trading partner for the Canucks. That is a team in New York, and I know Miller wouldn't waive to go to Buffalo. I know that. I'm aware of that, but I'm just thinking out loud here that Buffalo looks like they might need to make a move. Maybe Detroit, as they're trying to claw their way up the charts, maybe you could talk to Yzerman and see what he's looking at. But it is around that time where Alvin should, and probably is, working the phones to try to make things better. I do get the feeling the Canucks wanted to improve the blue line in the offseason and they didn't get it done. I do get that feeling. I have no sources on that, but I do have that feeling. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, though, on who you'd move and what you think you'd get. Sure, one of those times where like, yeah, go ahead, give me your trade speculation. I don't normally do the trade speculation, but there's so much smoke around this. There's likely a fire there. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And hey, thank you guys so much for all your support as always. I will talk to you again soon.